Welcome to Fate's Wide Wheel. I'm your host, Sam, and this week we are going to be talking about Star Wars The Acolyte. I'm really looking forward to talking about this series. I know that longtime listeners of the show will completely know my love for Star Wars. It's something that's been hinted at and teased for quite a while, and I think that this is a great way to talk about what's current and what's actually on the air for a few more days anyway until the season finale airs, or potential series finale. I don't know. I think that there is a plan for a season 2, but I don't know that it's been announced yet. So I'm really looking forward to talking about Star Wars. Now, I know that this show has been controversial. I know that there have been a lot of folks out there that have had a lot of really mean things to say about it, and to people that talk about it, they're not being mean as well. I've already experienced a little bit of that, but I'm not worried about that because I'm here to talk about something that I enjoy, and to certainly, point out some of the critiques that I have of the show, because there are a couple. But ultimately, it's Star Wars. I love Star Wars, and I'm sure to find something that I enjoy in it. So let's just jump right in. First of all, there's a couple things that I wanted to get out of the way about the Acolyte, because I think that there are two facets of the series that set it apart from anything else that we've seen, either in film or television, from Star Wars before. One is the era in which it takes place, and that is the High Republic. For those that aren't aware, there was a series of novels that have been released, that are currently being released under the High Republic label. Now, initially, this first phase kicked off with Light of the Jedi. In fact, there's some cool swag here. Here's a bag that Out of Print did with a special edition of the first book. A nice little canvas tote bag with the High Republic logo on it. So the High Republic basically spans about 500 to 100 years before the rise of the Galactic Empire, which of course we see in Revenge of the Sith, episode 3 proper. And this is a time when the Republic and the Jedi are sort of the shining stars of the galaxy, although there are definitely some cracks in the facade starting to form, which is something that's explored in the novels, and certainly something that's explored and touched on in the Acolyte a bit as well. The third phase began just this past November, which I do believe is going to be the final phase. Now, we have actually seen the High Republic in animated form. I meant to say live action earlier when I was speaking about film and television, but we have seen the High Republic represented in animated form with Star Wars Young Jedi Adventures, which I've actually watched quite a few episodes of. It's been Jude's intro into Star Wars, so it's a fun show, and I think helps to kind of show the world to a younger audience with all the familiar trappings of Star Wars, just set in a different era. Um, it's worth noting that the High Republic era actually started way back in September of 2018 with a sort of top secret project called Luminous. And a bunch of writers got together at a retreat at Skywalker Ranch to sort of, plot the course of this series. And it's taken place through a number of novels, obviously, some short fiction and comic books as well. The novel range, includes adult novels, young adult novels, and even children's books. The core novels are basically all you need to get the overall story of the High Republic, but there's some really great things that they dive deeper into in the young adult books and the comic books in particular. Some stuff that's touched on in the novels that gets fleshed out maybe a little bit more. Some events that get a little bit more explanation, if you will. But I am woefully behind. I've only read the first book, which is not a reflection on the quality of it, because it's actually very well done. I really enjoyed the exploration of the Republic and the Jedi, and of course the I don't want to spoil too much, so I'll just leave it at that. But there's definitely some interesting things that take place over the course of the novel series, which I've kind of spoiled myself on a few things here and there just by virtue of reading some of the comic books as well. The next thing that I wanted to touch on is the genre of wuxia. Wuxia is a genre of Chinese fiction concerning the adventures of martial artists in ancient China. That's straight from Wikipedia. The stories have been told through novels and film and television. even animation as well. Perhaps most famously beginning with films in kind of the with King Hu in particular being the the master of the genre, if you will. In fact, I have a couple of his films right here: Dragon Inn, and a film that Acolyte definitely borrows a page from, Come Drink With Me. Both of these are fantastic editions of the films, by the way. This is the Arrow edition of Come Drink With Me. Some incredible special features on here. And the film itself is just so much fun, and there are a number of fights in the film, including the final fight, and one of the first fights that we see, which again is mirrored by the first episode of The Acolyte in some interesting ways that feel very much akin to a fight you would see in Star Wars, whether it was in the Clone Wars cartoon, perhaps, or even in one of the films. Dragon Inn is a little bit different, but still maintains a lot of those elements as well. Of course, one of the things that wuxia films are probably most noted for is the wire fu, for lack of a better term. That involved the actors being, hung by wires and walking across treetops, or getting ready to deliver a kick and hanging in the air for an incredibly long time, and maybe delivering multiple kicks to multiple people without ever actually touching the ground. Being able to use special powers, electricity from the fingertips, control the winds, all sorts of things that are very akin to what we see from Force users in Star Wars, honestly. Now, wuxia films were not necessarily a direct influence on George Lucas with Star Wars. Maybe it's something that he was familiar with a little bit, but as we well know, kind of the most direct influences on Star Wars were Kurosawa films, samurai films, Jedi, and which of course, Jedi is pretty much right in that word, and westerns, and of course like Buck Rogers serials and Flash Gordon serials, that sort of thing that he had grown up on. But I think that as the years have gone by, as the franchise has grown and blossomed in fascinating ways, we've seen a lot of other genres really touch Star Wars, including, of course, spaghetti westerns with like The Mandalorian, Jean le Carré spy fiction with something like Andor. All the way up to The Acolyte, now seeing like this wuxia influence. And I think that one of the things that's beautiful about Star Wars is it does tend to, be kind of this, for lack of a better term, this melting pot of a lot of different genres, and yet remaining its kind of own singular thing, right? Like nothing else could be Star Wars, right? And I think that there's so many elements that it's kind of taken a little bit from here and a little bit from there with its own originality and its own bit of genius, and created something wholly new. And now Star Wars has at this point really over the past 30 years become a genre unto itself. We have 11 feature films, multiple television series, animated series, video games, and of course novels, which is something that we will talk a little bit about in this as well. More so than just the High Republic, because there are a number of things that were introduced in the novel range back in the 90s that are being explored in different ways in The Acolyte, which I think is fascinating. So that's kind of the primer for a couple of things that I'm going to talk about with The Acolyte, but I wanted to kind of get that out right away in front, so that we kind of had a bit of a lexicon and understood language here before we talk more about the show proper. So let's just begin with the very first episode. Leslie Headland is the creative force behind The Acolyte. She, of course, co-created Russian Doll, and she is someone that has a very unique take, I think, on a lot of subjects, while also, again, much like Star Wars, being able to borrow a little bit from here and a little bit from there and create something of her own design. She is a graduate of Tisch School of the Arts at New York University. I bring that up because I'm friends with a couple of people that went there, and the school, obviously, when it comes to the arts, I mean, it carries a lot of name recognition, but in addition to that, like, you're getting high end instruction, frankly, and so she's got a great pedigree as far as that's concerned, if you will. The interesting thing about her being named the creator behind The Acolyte is that she is really one of our first women to take hold of a Star Wars show. She's a queer creator. On top of that, the show obviously focuses strongly on these women that are at the core of our story, and I've really enjoyed her take on a lot of elements of Star Wars mythology, and I think that I understand perhaps why it might have ruffled feathers. I will never understand the hate, obviously, or the review bombing, but I can certainly understand where maybe some of that is born from. um it's unfortunate because I think that there's a lot of really wonderful things to be gleaned from the series, and I think that it connects strongly to things that have already been present in Star Wars. We're just getting to see it in a new light, and I think that that's kind of what the current franchise is all about. Is It's about taking these elements of Star Wars and giving us a larger window in, right? I think the Mandalorian does the same thing. Bounty hunters were something that was, other than the Clone Wars cartoon, which obviously is brilliant, and of course a bit in Rebels, up until the Mandalorian came out, like we'd never really seen the bounty hunters get that focus except in the 90s novel range, which again is something that I keep coming back to, because not that any of these creators are borrowing from the 90s novels, although in some cases they are. I think it's important to remember that a lot of this type of storytelling has already been done, which is all the more surprising that people would be so up in arms about it. And I'm going to touch on some of the controversy as we talk a little bit about episode 3 in particular, but I do think that frankly it's been overblown. But hey, it's the internet. What are you going to do, right? So Leslie Headland is our creator, and she wrote and directed our first episode, Lost Found. Again, we're High Republic era. It's about 100 years before anything that we would see in like episode 3. So the Clone Wars are way, way, way off in the future. The birth of Obi-Wan, Anakin, Qui-Gon, all the characters that we see, for instance, in episode 1 even are far off in the future as well. In the first scene, we are introduced to Jedi Master Indara, played by Carrie-Anne Moss. Okay, so this is going to be full spoilers, obviously, but let's get this right out of the way. I can't decide if it is absolutely brilliant, incredibly frustrating, or a mix of both that we have somebody like Carrie-Anne Moss, who's wonderful in the role, who, we get to see in this really cool wuxia-inspired fight scene in the very opening moments of the show, get killed. I was surprised. I was shocked. I did not expect it. And for that, I think it was the perfect entry into the series, because it was a reminder that no one is safe, expect the unexpected, and that this show might not be what you think it's going to be, or might not be about what you think it's going to be about. We learn, of course, throughout the course of this episode, that Osha, former Padawan of Soul, is responsible for the assassination of Indara, or at least that's what everyone thinks, because Osha had a sister, a twin sister, May, who everyone thought was dead, but turns out that she's not. And so the dynamic of the series is set up in this first episode, where you have these two twins, Force users, one clearly flirting with the dark side, the other kind of having turned her back, left the Jedi Order, not interested in pursuing being a Jedi. We don't really know why yet. Let's talk about some other characters. So a couple of other characters that we meet early on, as Osha is arrested, is Jedi Knight Yord Fondar, played by Charlie Barnett. It's interesting because until really episode 4, we don't get much of a window into this character or his relationship with Osha. And I think that what we see of him up until now is very much just into that, by the book box. This is someone who is going to make sure that every I is dotted, every T is crossed. The code is the code, and I will follow it. And anyone who is outside of that is basically beneath me. And I have something that they don't have. And so there's almost kind of a slight air of arrogance to the character as well. We're also introduced to, at this point, we're also introduced shortly after this to Jedi Master Soul. Soul is a very interesting character for numerous reasons. I think, not the least of which the actor playing the role, Lee Jung-jae, is someone who, by virtue of Squid Game, has risen to prominence, has won awards, is coming to this show on a lot of Another character that we're introduced to in the early goings of the episode is Jedi Master Soul. Soul, of course, is played by Lee Jung-jae, and Lee is coming hot off of Squid Game, a very different character, obviously, has won multiple awards, and, riding this wave now of notice based off of his earlier performances. We're seeing him in a very prominent role, very interesting role, a role very akin to like Liam Neeson's role in The Phantom Menace as Qui-Gon Jinn, which, of course, is a character that Lee has even been on the record to say influenced his performance. And I think it is very easy to see, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but Soul is clearly someone who is very attuned to the Force, is very clearly a powerful Jedi, but is not someone who buys into the righteousness of the Jedi Order. And I think one of the things that's incredibly important about the Acolyte, about the Clone Wars, about Revenge of the Sith, about the entire prequel trilogy, is the reminder, and it's reinforced, quite frankly, by the sequel trilogy even, and what happens with Luke, is that the sense of righteousness that the Jedi Order ends up feeling, and certainly those on the High Council, I think perpetuate a bit, is a part of their downfall. And then a lot of it is pride. They believe that they are above the order of things, and the truth of the matter is, and something that we learn obviously from Qui-Gon, that we see from Obi-Wan in A New Hope even, is the idea that the Force is the thing that ties us all together. It doesn't put anyone above anyone else. It doesn't put anyone else on a pedestal. I think Soul gets that. So Soul is a little bit rebellious, just like Qui-Gon. I think that Qui-Gon in particular is one of my favorite characters in all of Star Wars. I think that seeing the journey of that character and hoping to see more of him. We did get to see him a little bit at the very end of the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, which would be awesome. And then also a very important novel in the series, Master and Apprentice, which deals with an adventure that Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan have prior to the events of The Phantom Menace. Is, first of all, it's a great novel. It's one of my favorite Star Wars novels, and in particular, dealing with Qui-Gon and his relationship with Count Dooku, and Qui-Gon's own flirtations with not even necessarily the dark side per se, but certainly stepping outside the Jedi Order's interpretation of the Force and what it means to be a Jedi. And I think for Qui-Gon and somebody like Soul, the idea of what it means to be a Jedi is at odds with what the accepted form of being a Jedi is, certainly by the High Council of this time in the High Republic. And we see it again. And we see a lot of that pride from somebody like Mace Windu. I think Mace is a great character. I really do. But I also think that if you look at the prequel trilogy, and you look at some of the events of the Clone Wars, we see a Jedi who again thinks that, the Jedi are right, and if you are not in line with the Jedi, then you are wrong. And I think that Qui-Gon and Soul allow for those shades of gray. And I'm not here to talk about gray Jedi or any of that stuff, because I know that there are a lot of people out there that turn their noses up at that. I don't think that that's necessarily what we're talking about. I don't think it's as simple as saying the light side is white, the dark side is black, and there's no in between. I think that there is in between, but I don't necessarily think that in between automatically changes what a Jedi is or what a Sith is. I think that it's important to remember that this binary system that exists with the Force has often led to conflict, and not only conflict, but it has led to tragedy, and it has led to the breaking of the Jedi Order, the destruction of the Jedi Order. And I think finding a way to appreciate both sides, the yin and the yang, is really probably the way to true attunement with the Force. And I think that that's something that even Yoda understands. And I think that Yoda, it's interesting because a character like Yoda, I do think that he gets it, but I also wonder if he knows how to articulate it. I also wonder if he, because of everything he's seen with the length of his life, if it's possible that for him, he realizes that there are certain shifts that have to happen incrementally, that they can't necessarily happen all at once. And I also wonder if this is something that we'll see explored in the future films films that deal with Rey and what she is going to do with a potential rebirth of the Jedi Order, because I think that Rey, learning from Luke, which again we could critique whether or not Luke should have had these lessons already himself, but Rey being able to learn from Luke and see what had gone before, I think maybe now she's in a place where she can understand that that the force is not a binary, and that ultimately it is the thread that ties us all together, that it binds all things. And I think that that's one of the things that the Acolyte is exploring as well. I think Soul obviously is a great example of that. I also think that it's fascinating with Soul's attachment to Osha, and attachment obviously is something that's forbidden by the Jedi Order. How many times have we seen that? Of course, just wreak havoc on individuals, and of course the entire Order, the galaxy, even. Look at Anakin, obviously. So I think that it's interesting that he has this attachment to Osha. That perhaps one of the things about attachment being forbidden isn't that attachment is wrong or bad, but because it has been verboten by the Jedi Order, what happens is that you have these people now have this internal conflict, as opposed to the Jedi Order realizing that it's better to just let it be. We're able to let the force flow through us. We're able to come to this place of almost nirvana, right? And then boundaries and restrictions are imposed on it, and oftentimes those boundaries and restrictions, we bounce up against them, and there's no choice but to either go the other way or try to break that wall down. And I think that one of the things that we see continually with the exploration of the force through Star Wars is that that conflict, that sense of conflict, that pull leads to tragedy in almost every case. In this instance, of course, we know that Osha left the Jedi Order, that she has experienced a lot of inner conflict. We find out that, of course, that May is alive, that May is hunting down Jedi. We don't necessarily know exactly why. We do come to find out, of course, through the course of the next episode, Revenge and Justice, that one of the things that she is doing is hunting down the Jedi that were on her home planet when her entire family was killed. We don't really know much else about it at the end of episode 2. We see some really cool stuff at a Jedi temple on Olega. Jedi Master Torben is in a force meditation and able to repel May's attacks. And Soul, Jeki, Yord, and Osha go to investigate this attack. But May, of course, is able to figure out how to get by Torben's defenses, and Khmer gives May poison, and then warns her that she still needs to kill one of these Jedi without a weapon. May gives the poison to Torben, and he takes it. And dies. May escapes, and the interesting thing is that Osha kind of has her dead to rights, but lets her go. It's her twin sister, but there's so much at play here, and I think that the way that the story is unfolding is very interesting. I love that we're getting some great world hopping. I love that at this point, there's nothing too in my face about how long it takes to get from point A to point B. I do think that sometimes I wish, one of my favorite things about A New Hope is the time spent on the Millennium Falcon between leaving Tatooine and getting to the Death Star. There's some wonderful stuff there with Obi-Wan and Han, and Obi-Wan and Luke, obviously. And we're not getting those types of scenes as much anymore in Star Wars, even in The Last Jedi, which I do like that film for the most part. We don't really get much of that. There's a little bit of a scene, but most of it is driven by this propulsive kind of like action beat 1 to action beat 2 to action beat 3 to action beat 4, and I understand that we want to propel our plot, but some of those quieter moments with the characters is stuff that I really, really appreciate. And this show is filled with some nice quiet moments, although there is something still very propulsive about it, and I think that that's just indicative of the day and age in which we live. Another thing that I will say about streaming shows in general that can be really hard is that we talked about this before with Quantum Leap, that we live in a day and age where people have gotten used to the fact of being able to binge watch a show, Netflix syndrome, right? Where it all comes out at once, we watch it all at once, and then we move on to the next thing, and we get all the answers to all of our questions right off the bat. I think that there are a lot of shows out there that have given themselves over to that format. And I think that when you go week by week, sometimes it can be very frustrating for viewers because you're not necessarily getting a full story. And I think that there are a lot of shows out there that have been serialized in nature in the past, where they've been able to tell a singular story in their 45 to 50 minutes, and then and yet connect it to the larger narrative that's being woven over the course of the 10, 12, 20 episodes in the season. Unfortunately, I don't necessarily think that that's what we're seeing here in the Acolyte. I think that we are seeing just one large narrative, each chapter getting released week by week by week, which is fine. But I think that The Mandalorian, one of the reasons why The Mandalorian has been successful in the past, and I even have some criticisms of The Mandalorian as well, but I feel like each episode has been able to tell its own story, sometimes to the detriment of the larger narrative, quite frankly. I think it's really hard to stick the landing with being able to weave a narrative together while also telling wonderful singular stories. So I am curious as to how that will progress. Now, that said, I feel like the first two episodes, which were released on the same day, I do think that the first two episodes help to set a lot of stuff up and do leave me with a sense of like, okay, I want to know what's next. Then we get to episode 3, Destiny. Episode 3 is fascinating to me. I actually enjoyed it. Okay, the internet didn't die. Now, here's the thing. I also wonder if it was the right placement for the episode, coming after seeing these two episodes to set up our story, and then knowing that you're basically going to have us wait 2 weeks until we get any kind of resolution in order to tell this sort of backstory for these characters. It's an interesting choice, but I almost wonder if it shouldn't have been done either later or perhaps even been one of the first two episodes that dropped at the same time. I also wonder if they knew that this was going to cause people to, I'm sure they did. There's no way that people did not know that this episode was going to ruffle some feathers. So look, let's get a couple things out of the way. I love the idea of this order of witches, this coven having, left society to be on their own, to do their own thing. I think it's great. I don't see anything wrong with it at all. We have seen Force users who are outside of that Jedi Sith binary since the courtship of Princess Leia, if not beforehand, and specifically the Witches of Dathomir. So this is nothing new. And anyone that's taking issue with it because we have these women in a place of power and a place of isolation deciding to retreat and get away from society and practice their version of the Force on their own, the thread as they call it, I don't get. I just don't understand. But what I do understand is why some people are having an issue with Osha and May's origins. I think that some folks are bothered by the idea that Osha and may be creations of the Force, because prior to this, the only person we knew of that was potentially, because we don't know for certain, it's been hinted at in comic books, it's been hinted at on, in film, although it's never been definitively stated, it's been hinted at that Anakin is indeed a product of the Force. Now, if we get even more specific, it's been hinted at that Emperor Palpatine specifically utilized the Force in order to create Anakin. Now, I think that none of this is definitive. None of this is canonized, if you will. Oh, I can't with canon anymore. I feel like it's like just enjoy a story, right? Like if it makes sense, great, and if it has callbacks, awesome. But to get all bound up in what's canon and what's not canon, it's ruining our enjoyment of things. But nothing has been canonized as far as Anakin's origins, and I think if the Acolyte is potentially going towards defining the way that Anakin was conceived, and telling that story by way of this, this story of these two twin sisters who may have been conceived by the nature of the Force, I'm all for it. Do I think it takes anything away from how special Anakin is? No, I don't, but I can see how some people might. And I can understand why some folks might be bothered by the notion that Anakin is no longer quite as unique as he maybe once was. That said, I think at this particular point in time, and I'm only discussing the first 4 episodes because that's all I've seen at the point that I'm recording this. We don't know. We just don't know for certain if that's what actually happened with May and Osha. Um, Mother Anastasia, who is the leader of this coven, of course, she tells Indara that they have no father, that they were carried by another witch, Mother Coral, who appears to be Zabrak, which is the same species that Darth Maul comes from. And Anastasia teaches the children the Force, again, calling it the thread. And one of the things that is talked about, which is another thing that I can understand ruffles feathers, is that the Jedi misuse the Force. I think that's a fantastic concept. I think that, there's this fragility that exists within the fandom, because we've seen our heroes get maybe torn down a little bit. And I think it's natural. Look, if I'm being completely honest, I would have loved a different ending for Luke. All right. I would have loved a different Luke throughout the sequel trilogy. I absolutely would have. Luke was, and still is my hero in so many ways. I'm a Luke. I like that. Luke was my hero. Yes, I love Han, yes, I love Leia, obviously, but like, I think Luke, for me, that was the person I followed in the original trilogy. That was the person that I wanted to be. I wanted a Luke Skywalker lightsaber. I wanted to have every Luke Skywalker action figure. I wanted to read the books, that told me what Luke got up to afterwards. So I think that I understand how frustrating it can be to see those heroes kind of get broken down. And when you put the Jedi Order, this bastion to goodness and order in the galaxy, up above everything else, and you start to maybe take them off their pedestal, I think the thing that you have to remember is Obi-Wan said it best. It's all from a certain point of view. And I think that, what Anastasia has to say, in a lot of ways, there's a lot of truth to it. I also think that even the way the character is portrayed, written, and the episode is directed give us plenty of opportunities to doubt that Anastasia is right, or that her motives are entirely pure. I think that that's one of the things that actually makes this episode is so good, is that I find myself questioning everything. I'm questioning the coven. I'm questioning the nature of the thread. I'm questioning the Jedi. Indara comes off as being very. There's something about Indara that I'm definitely drawn to, but at the same time, there seems to be that self-righteousness of like, I'm a Jedi, and I'm not used to people saying no to me. Now, that said, she's very much listening, which I appreciate. I love the fact that they're able to have a conversation. I love the fact that that we don't get, it does not devolve to violence. It comes close, and obviously what happens to Torben is not necessarily great, right? But ultimately there's this agreement, right? There's this agreement made of like, yes, we're gonna, we will let you test them, right? And Soul again is forming this connection with Osha. We see him even give her his lightsaber at one point. There's so much mistrust between these two sides, and it's born out of very real circumstances. The Jedi have been spying on the Coven. The Coven is willing to resort to a form of violence against Torben, a form of assault. We'll call it assault. And I think that all of this mistrust causes the viewer to question, who's in the right here. And I really, really liked that. And I think anything that kind of shakes us in our beliefs and things is good. And I think as a viewer, someone who loves Star Wars and appreciates Star Wars, something that shakes the tree a little bit and starts to get me to question where these characters are coming from, what it is that they want, and question those larger systems that are at play too. Question the Jedi Order, question whether or not they're good for the galaxy, question whether or not the Coven of Witches are actually noble or not, if there's something more nefarious at play, question whether or not Osha and May could indeed be the product of the Force. So to me, again, I really appreciated the episode a great deal. I didn't quite understand the way that the Jedi were able to enforce, this idea that like we're going to test them and take them with us, with your permission, of course. It, to me, and again, I don't think that this is a problem. I'm just noticing it though, is that it feels very akin to what the Empire later does with children when they're taking them from their family to to raise them to be stormtroopers, which is something that is, basically canonized throughout the new novel series, and as well as being a part of the sequel series, and how the First Order ends up getting their troopers as well. But it was leftover. It was a system from the Empire. So it's interesting that, in a way, the Empire was doing the same thing that, the Jedi are basically doing, which obviously we knew. We knew that was the case. I mean, look at the Phantom Menace, right? Now, of course, it's framed in such a way that Anakin will have a better life if he goes with Qui-Gon. But at the same time, Qui-Gon is taking this child from his mother, taking him out of slavery, yes, but leaving his mother in slavery. There's a lot about the situation that's not great, And again, I think Qui-Gon, I love that character, and I think Qui-Gon did do what was right. But I also think that maybe he was a little too proud. Maybe there was some hubris there. Maybe he bit off more than he could chew, because ultimately what happens with the Duel of the Fates, and all you have to do is Google Dave Filoni and Duel with the Fates, and I Duel of the Fates, and I think that you will get a wonderful example of why that duel is so incredibly important, and why those moments really set Anakin up for his fall. And a lot of it had to do with the fact that Qui-Gon is killed, that had Qui-Gon lived, things may have gone a very, 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 very different way. So I think, again, we're seeing this kind of origin story of Osha and May that is kind of enlightening us to the fact that it's all from a certain point of view, and that perspective matters, and that Osha and May's perspectives differ a great deal, and that Osha is excited by the idea of perhaps becoming a Jedi and going to train at the Jedi Order. That for her, there's something beyond Mother Anastaea's teachings of the thread, and realizing that there's something beyond that perhaps there's something that she can learn, and there's a place that she can call home outside of this very insulated existence as a part of the coven with Anastasia and Coral. An existence that is really based around fear. These women are clearly very afraid, and while they are developing and accepting and doing everything they can to cultivate their own power, which is brilliant and beautiful and wonderful, there's still this fear that exists. And as we know in the universe of Star Wars, fear leads to anger, leads to hate, leads to the dark side. And so you have to start to wonder, it's like, how much of the thread exists outside of that binary system of light and dark, and how much of it perhaps maybe goes one way or the other. And so again, I think an episode like Destiny, it really provokes a lot of questions, and I appreciate that about anything, any form of art. And I think for something that I love and am invested in as much as Star Wars, it's actually really, really cool to see. I don't think the episode's perfect. I think I am left with some questions about the nature of, like, why exactly did the coven leave? What exactly is the true nature behind the ceremony to their induction, their sort of coming of age into the coven? Why is it that that we see? What is it specifically that Osha is bucking up against? Is it just normal childhood rebellion? Is there something more there? Is it something deeper? Do they represent two sides of the coin here? Do they represent light and dark, right? Do they represent yin and yang? Are they somehow bound together in a way that one cannot possibly function in a true way without the other, right? I think that there's a lot to be asked about the nature of the relationship between May and Osha, and of course, knowing about the nature of the relationship between Kylo Ren and Rey Skywalker, and them being a dyad in the Force, and what that means and what that could mean for Star Wars narratives going forward. So it provokes so many questions. I don't necessarily know that the episode itself holds together on its own, telling this overall narrative. I think it's definitely, again, just a piece of the puzzle, and that can be frustrating for viewers sometimes. And I think, again, in this day and age when we get a little impatient, it can be difficult for us to wait for those answers, especially knowing, as I'm about to talk about episode 4, those answers don't come in the next episode. By the end of the episode, of course, we see, and again, I'm wondering certain point of view stuff here, we see that May is responsible for starting the fire that ends up seemingly kill the coven, including May. Osha is taken to Coruscant, and Sol promises to train her as a Padawan. May is, of course, shown to survive, and we know that already, obviously. And as we get into episode 4, Day, stuff really starts to come together. We start to see Kalnaka, who is the Wookiee that I failed to mention earlier. Kalnaka is the Wookiee Jedi who was also present, of course, as we see in Episode 3 Destiny. And now the search for Kalnaka is on, because that's May's next target, basically. Soul looks like is going to be her final target. This episode I enjoyed a great deal because we get more of Camille, played by Manny Jacinto from The Good Place. I think Manny does a wonderful job in the show so far. What we've seen of him, I've enjoyed the character a great deal. I enjoyed what we saw of him in particular in Revenge and Justice. There's a sense of humor to the character, but there's also a bit of an edge there. I have my suspicions about the true nature of the character, and I'm looking forward to seeing how those pay off, especially in the back half of the episodes. I enjoy the quest nature of the episode, the journey of the episode. I love what we start to see about the characters. I mentioned earlier, some of the questions that I had kind of about the by the book Yord, and we start to see sort of a different side, more facets of Yord in this episode, and I really enjoyed that. And I thought that in particular, the relationship with Osha is really interesting here. Someone that I've not really spoken enough about, who I absolutely love, of course, is Daphne Keene as Jackie Lan, who's Soul's current Padawan. She's awesome. I just really, really enjoy the character a great deal. I think that, again, you see Soul's influence on her. You see a relationship that I think Qui-Gon wanted to have with Obi-Wan between the two of them. And again, I'm drawing all these parallels because we're in Star Wars. We're in the world of Star Wars. The narratives, they're so interconnected and woven together. It's worth noting. Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon had a very contentious relationship, especially prior to the Phantom Menace. And we still see some of the contentions in the Phantom Menace. Obi-Wan was much more like Yord, much more a by the book. We're Jedi. We have to be, this is the way we have to do things. Qui-Gon is the one that helped kind of break him out of that. And the nature of their relationship was particularly volatile in a lot of ways, for Jedi anyway, prior to Master and Apprentice. Once they start to come to an understanding, they start to grow together, we start to really see in the Phantom Menace this pairing working and the relationship paying off. But before it can really reach its zenith, if you will, it's too late, and Qui-Gon's gone. And I think that is also one of the things that's so fascinating about that strain of Obi-Wan blaming himself for Anakin's fall. We see it in Empire. We see it in New Hope. We see it even, into Return of the Jedi, when we see the ghost of Obi-Wan and what he has to say about, teaching Anakin too young and that sort of stuff. And again, it's all from a certain point of view, right? So I think that, Obi-Wan, again, I love the character of Obi-Wan. He might be my favorite character in all of Star Wars. I think that we learn so much about the nature of this universe and this narrative. Of course, Sir Alec Guinness, what more can you say? But anyway, I think the nature of the relationship between Soul and Jackie is interesting because it feels much more akin to maybe what Qui-Gon wished it had been, because she seems to really understand Soul's teachings and really, kind of place herself outside of the idea that there's, this strict binary of good, bad, right and wrong. And instead that there are multiple ways to potentially attack a problem, if you will. So great character, great performance. I really enjoyed it. And I think that, in Day, we get to see a lot more of that. Once they're at Kofar and they're looking for Kalnaka, again, we get this great sense of the journey, the quest, and again, we start to learn some wonderful stuff about the characters. It is reminiscent almost of that Millennium Falcon journey, like I said. As these characters are on the move and going after something, we take the time to maybe get to know certain things about them that we didn't before. And we see that with May and Camille a lot too. And it's really, really good stuff between May and Camille. And May starting to question, some of what she's doing, and the way that Camille is kind of like prompting her at certain points. And, again, there's something going on with Camille that is much, much, much deeper than what we're actually getting. By the end of this, of course, May traps Camille. He's hanging from a tree, like Luke and Han and Jedi, and she's off to find Kalnaka. And the other group is, of course, looking for Kalnaka. They start to hear, what's going on. And just at the moment when we think that the Jedi are going to arrive and save the day, that's when things really, really, really take a turn, because May's master shows up. And he's got a red lightsaber. He's got a scary looking mask, slightly reminiscent of Kylo Ren's, actually, worth noting. But with this mouth, this Joker-esque, like, twisted grin. And he goes on the attack. And again, we get this really cool wuxia influenced battle between them, and the master with the red lightsaber and that cool mask is just all over it. And that's where we're going to leave things, on a bit of a cliffhanger. I'm really looking forward to, as I record this, episode 7 is now out, which I will be watching soon, and then episode 8, the finale, will come out, and I'll be back next week to discuss my thoughts on the series as a whole and that back 4. This is different for me. Usually if you're a longtime viewer of the show, you know that I have literally spent an hour plus sometimes dissecting a 45-minute episode of Quantum Leap. I'm going to miss a lot of things. I'm going to breeze past a lot of things. I'm not going to talk about every little Easter egg. I'm not going to talk about every little plot development or point. I'm just going to highlight some of the things that I enjoyed, trying a new format out and see if it works. And if it doesn't, and we need to figure something else out, then that's what we'll do. But there's going to be a lot more Star Wars in the future. I'm looking forward to talking about Star Wars. It's not a Star Wars podcast. It's not a Quantum Leap podcast. It's Fate's Wide Wheel. And I just want to say that I appreciate you all. I'm so glad that you're here. Thank you so much for joining me today. Please hit that like and subscribe button. It really helps the channel out. I want to grow this, and I want to be able to connect with as many of you as possible so we can continue these conversations and these dialogues. We can talk about what we like and what we don't like, and maybe we can maybe we can just change the tenor of those conversations just a little bit, at least in our sector of the galaxy. But thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with me. I really appreciate it. I'll be back next week to talk more about Star Wars: The Acolyte.